Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is the 1920 Cleveland Tigers NFL football season. 1920 was the first year of the NFL, and Cleveland had a team. This new National Football League was called the American Professional Football Association. It was renamed the National Football League in 1922. The Cleveland Tigers played at League Park, also known as Dunn Field in Cleveland, and they finished in ninth place with a record of 1-4-2, winning percentage of .200. The first place team was the Akron Pros, who were 6-0-3. Second place, the Decatur, Illinois Staleys, 5-1-2. Third place, the Buffalo All-Americans, 4-1-1. Fourth place, the Dayton Triangles, who were 4-2-2. Fifth place, Rock Island Independence, 4-2-1. Sixth place, the Chicago Cardinals, 3-2-1. Seventh place, the Canton Bulldogs, 4-3-1. Eighth place, the Detroit Heralds, 1-3. Ninth place, the Cleveland Tigers, 1-4-2. 10th place, the Chicago Tigers, 1-5-1. 11th place, the Columbus Panhandles, 0-5. 12th place, the Hammond Pros, 0-3. 13th place, the Muncie Flyers, 0-1. And in 14th place, the Rochester Jeffersons, 0-1. Among the leading independent teams, the Cincinnati Celts were 3-3. The Fort Wayne Friars, 3-2-1. Lansing Oldsmobiles, 6-1-3, and the Toledo Maroons, 1-4. Now, for the 1920 Tigers season, first game was October 10th at Dayton against the Triangles, and it was a scoreless tie. October 17th, they played in Canton against the Bulldogs and lost 7-0 with 7,000 fans at the game. October 24th, they played in Akron against the Pros and lost that game 7-0 in front of 5,000 fans. October 31st, they hosted the Columbus Panhandles and won 7-0 in front of 3,000 home fans. November 7th, they hosted the Canton Bulldogs and lost 18-0. 8,000 fans came. November 14th, they hosted the Akron Pros and played to a 7-7 tie in front of 8,000 fans. November 21st, they hosted the Toledo Maroons and won 14-0 in front of 1,500 fans. And the last game was November 28th at Buffalo against the All-Americans. They lost 7-0. 5,000 fans were at that game. The Tigers had two head coaches in 1920. Stan Kofal was 0-2-1, and then Al Pierotti was 1-2-1. There were NFL organizational meetings to create the NFL. The first was August 20th, 1920. Ralph Hay of the Canton Bulldogs hosted the meeting at his auto agency, Hayes Auto Agency in Canton, Ohio. Representatives of teams that came included Canton, Cleveland, Akron, and Dayton. American Professional Football Conference teams included Buffalo, Rochester, who joined by letter. Second meeting was on September 17th, also in Canton. Teams in the Midwest and Western New York State were invited. These included George Halas, who organized the semi-pro team, the Staley Manufacturing Company in Decatur, Illinois. They were a starch maker. This team became the Chicago Bears. Halas was the 1919 Rose Bowl MVP, playing for the Great Lakes Naval Training Center when they defeated the Mare Island Marines. Cleveland Tigers manager Jimmy O'Donnell came. Coach Stanley Kofal was the former Notre Dame quarterback. Jim Thorpe was the first NFL president. The APFC was the pro football of that era. Teams might punt on first down from their own 20. If a punt returner was near his own goal line, he might punt the ball back and not return the ball. Spalding Company made football helmets, which they called head harnesses. They were soft leather, Players often folded them and put them in their pocket. In 1920, there were no league standings published. The championship teams were based on a vote of the owners. Some teams had a weak schedule. On April 30th, 1921, the Akron Pros were voted the 1920 champions at an NFL meeting. Average attendance for the NFL in 1920 was 4,241. Stars received $150 a game. Patty Driscoll and Jim Thorpe received $300 a game. Reading a fine book. It's called The National Forgotten League, Entertaining Stories from Pro Football's First 50 Years by Dan Daly, 2012. And I'm reading another fine book, The League, How 5 Rivals Created the NFL and Launched a Pro Sports Empire by John Eisenberg, 2018. And I'm reading another fine book, Papa Bear, The Life and Legacy of George Halas by Jeff Davis, 2005. Jeff Davis wrote about George Halas, quote, the founder of the National Football League and creator of the mighty Chicago Bears, Hall of Famer George Halas single-handedly changed the way we spend our Sundays. He worked night and day, year after year, to make his game America's true national pastime. Paul Hornung, who was a Green Bay Packers star player, said, quote, George Halas is the greatest name in the history of this game. He's number one on top, no question. He is the father of professional football. The 1920 NFL championship game was the Akron Pros against the Decatur Staleys. It was at Cubs Park in Chicago, Illinois. 12,000 fans came. Stars included Fritz Pollard for the Pros and Patty Driscoll for the Staleys. It was a half-frozen, slippery field, and the result was a 0-0 tie. As we said, the league voted in April 2022 that the Pros were declared the NFL champions of 1920. Reading another fine book, The Columbus Panhandles, A Complete History of Pro Football's Toughest Team, 1900 to 1922, by Chris Willis, 2007. Joe Carr was the Columbus Panhandles team manager from 1907 to 1922, and he was NFL president from 1921 to 1939. The Panhandles team was created by workers at Panhandle shops in Pennsylvania. They worked for Pennsylvania railroads in Columbus, Ohio. Pro football's most famous family in 1907 was the Nasser brothers, John, Phil, Ted, Fred, Frank, and Al. Stars for the Panhandles. Panhandles helped keep pro football alive in the early years. Panhandle shops serviced railroads when they needed fixing. Team practices were 45 minutes during lunch break. 1907, Joe Carr with the Panhandles, the team traveled free on the railroads, played games on the road. There was no need to pay stadium rental. This was financially sound. The Nesser brothers were a famous big gate attraction in the Ohio and the Midwest. And I read another fine book, The First NFL Season by Mark Bowles, 2019. For the 1920 Cleveland Tigers, Jimmy O'Donnell was the owner. He was born in 1872 and died in 1947 at age 74. He was the co-founder of the Cleveland Tigers. In 1922, the NFL voted that each team needed to post a $1,000 guarantee. O'Donnell sold the team to jeweler Sam Deutsch in 1923. He was a deputy sheriff personnel manager for the Bailey Company from 1914 to 1934. He was in the real estate business on Cleveland's west side. He was the Democratic Party nominee for state representative in 1946, but died before the election. Jimmy O'Donnell. Bert Baston was a left offensive end and left defensive end. He was 6'1", 170 pounds. 26 years old, he went to Minnesota College, played in 7 games, started all 7. Baston was born in 1894 in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, and died in 1979 in St. Cloud, Minnesota, at age 84. He played for the 1916 Massillon Tigers, the 1919 Hammond All-Stars, and the 1920 Cleveland Tigers. At the University of Minnesota, he was an All-American, one of the first great catchers of the forward pass. He received the award from the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in World War I. He's in the College Football Hall of Fame. In 1915, he won a college football title World War I with the 17th Company, 5th Marine Regiment. Battle of Belle Isle Wood, he got a hole through his leg big enough to put a broom handle through. Battle of Belle Isle Wood. The Marines of the 5th earned the nickname Devil Dog. He spent a year in the hospital. He started a bakery in Detroit. He started the Burt Baston Chevrolet Company Minneapolis. He was the Minnesota Gophers ends coach from 1930 to 1941 and 1946 to 1950. In World War II, he was in the Marines in North Africa. Burt Baston. Harry Baujan was a right offensive end, right defensive end. He was 5'8", 170 pounds, 26 years old. He went to college at Notre Dame. Baujan played in 5 games. He started all 5. He was born in 1894 in Beardstown, Illinois, and died in 1976 in Dayton, Ohio at age 82. He served in the U.S. Army, played pro football from 1917 to 1921 for Pine Village Athletic Club, the Massillon Tigers, and the Cleveland Tigers in 1920 and 21. He was the head football coach at the University of Dayton from 1923 to 1946 and had a record of 124, 64, and 8. He was the head coach of the University of Dayton Flyers men's basketball team from 1923 to 1928. He served as the school's athletic director as well. He's in the College Football Hall of Fame. 1960, Baujan Field at the University of Dayton is the men's and women's soccer team's fields, named in his honor. 1933, he was the Ohio Athletic Conference champions, and in 1938, the Buckeye Athletic Association champions. Harry Baujan. George Brickley was a right offensive halfback and right defensive halfback, left offensive halfback, and left defensive halfback. And Brickley played for the Cleveland Tigers in 1919 and 1920. George Brickley. Jim Bryant was a quarterback, safety, right offensive halfback, and right defensive halfback. He was 5'6", 156 pounds, age 27. Went to college at George Washington in Pennsylvania. Played in 3 games, started all 3. He was born in 1893 in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and died in 1972 in Sacramento, California at age 78. Played for the 1919 Akron Indians and the 1920 Cleveland Tigers. Jim Bryant. Stan Kofal was a wingback, right defensive halfback, TB, left defensive halfback, quarterback, and safety. 5'11", 190 pounds, age 26. He went to college at Notre Dame. Played in 3 games, started all 3. He was born in 1893 in Cleveland, Ohio. Died in 1961 in Peninsula, Ohio at age 67. Went to high school in East Cleveland. He was in the U.S. Army. He played pro football from 1917 to 1924 for the Youngstown Patricians, Massillon Tigers, Cleveland Tigers, New York Giants, Union Quakers, and Portsville Maroons. He was a coach from 1925 to 1928 for the Massillon Tigers, Cleveland Tigers, and Roman Catholic High School in Pennsylvania, Loyola, Maryland, and Wake Forest. For the 1920 Tigers, he was the coach at the start of the season, had a record of 0-2-1, and was replaced by Al Pierotti. 1920, he attended the NFL Foundation meeting in Canton, Ohio, with owner Jimmy O'Donnell. Kofal was the first NFL vice president. In 1935, he founded the Stanco Oil Company in Cleveland. In 1942, he helped bring the Notre Dame Navy football game to Cleveland. He was the founder of the Cleveland Touchdown Club and chairman of the Cleveland Boxing Commission. He was the director of the liquor control for the state of Ohio. Stan Kofal. George Kahn was a TB and right defensive halfback, 5'6", 155 pounds. He was 25 years old, went to college at Oregon State, played in 6 games, started 3. He was born in 1895 in Hebron, Illinois, and died in 1973 in Laguna Beach, California at age 78. He went to high school in Pasadena, California. He was in the U.S. Army, played pro football from 1919 to 1920 with the Massillon Tigers, Cleveland Tigers, and Akron Pros. George Kahn. Earl Kramer was a fullback, linebacker, left offensive halfback, left defensive halfback. He was 5'11", 184 pounds. 24 years old, went to college at Hamline, played in 6 games, started 4. He was born in 1896 in Verona, Minnesota, and died in 1962 in Glendale, California at age 65. Went to high school at Winnebago, Minnesota. Played pro football from 1920 to 1926 with the Cleveland Tigers, Akron Pros, and Akron Indians. He scored 13 touchdowns in the NFL in his career. He kicked field goals. He had 11 rushing touchdowns and 2 receiving touchdowns. In 1923, he was the player coach for the Akron Pros. He's the all-time leading scorer for the Akron Pros. He played for them from 1921 to 1925. Earl Kramer. Mark Devlin was a quarterback safety. He was 5'10", 173 pounds, 26 years old, went to college at Holy Cross and St. Ambrose. He played in 3 games, started 2. He was born in 1894 in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and died in 1973 in Lawrence at age 79. He went to high school at St. John's Prep School in Danvers, Massachusetts. He was in the U.S. Navy in World War I. He played pro football from 1919 to 1921 with the Canton Bulldogs, Cleveland Tigers, New York Giants. He had a passing touchdown in 1920, and he won a title for the 1919 Canton Bulldogs. He was invited by Jim Thorpe to play on the team. He was a St. Ambrose football and basketball coach. From 1921 to 1947, he was the head football, baseball, and basketball coach at Lawrenceville High School in Lawrence, Massachusetts. His football team record was 147, 74, and 26. He won 3 state championships. He was the school's athletic director and facilities manager until his retirement in 1958. In 1965, the Lawrence High School baseball team was named in his honor. Mark Devlin. Dinger Doan was a fullback, linebacker, right offensive tackle, and right defensive tackle. And Doan played for the Cleveland Tigers from 1919 to 1920. He played in 4 games and started 3. Dinger Doan. Moon Ducote was a left offensive halfback and left defensive halfback. 5'11", 190 pounds, age 23, went to college at Auburn. He played in 1 game, which he started. He was born in 1897 in Cottonport, Louisiana, and died in 1937 in New Orleans, Louisiana, at age 39. He played for the 1920 Tigers. He was the baseball, football, and basketball coach. He was a football and baseball player. He's a football official, a minor league baseball player. He played for the Mobile Bears, minor league baseball, the Portsmouth Truckers, the Charlotte Hornets. Head football coach at Loyola University in New Orleans in 1924 and 25. Went at Spring Hill College from 1919 to 1933. 5 non-consecutive years. He was a head baseball and football coach at Louisiana State University in 1924. He received the nickname Moon due to his large head. In 1916 at Auburn, he kicked a 40-yard field goal off a teammate's helmet in the mud. They won that game 3-0. 1918, playing for the Cleveland Naval Reserve football team under Pop Warner. Warner called Ducote the greatest football player he ever saw. He's in the Louisiana Sports Hall of Fame. In 1926, Ducote played as a member of the Southern All-Stars, which lost an exhibition game 14-0 to the Red Grange-led Chicago Bears. Moon Ducote. Johnny Gilroy was a halfback, quarterback, safety, right offensive halfback, and right defensive halfback. He was 5'11", 175 pounds, 24 years old, went to college at Georgetown in Washington, D.C. He played in 1 game which he started. Gilroy was born in 1896 in Hudson, Massachusetts, and died in 1952 in Medford, Massachusetts, at age 56. He went to high school in Haverhill, Massachusetts. He was in the U.S. Army. He played pro football from 1920 to 1926 for the Canton Bulldogs, Cleveland Tigers, Washington Senators, and Boston Bulldogs. They called him the Great Gilroy. He was a rusher, passer, and kicker. In 1916, he led college football in scoring with 160 points. In 1940, he was arrested for larceny at a Massachusetts shoe factory. He stole 35 shoe stitching machines. He was a material inspector for the Works Progress Administration. Georgetown, he set school records, 307 points, 63 touchdowns, and points after the touchdown, 49. He graduated from Georgetown Dental School in 1919. Johnny Gilroy. Tom Gormley was a left offensive guard and left defensive guard, right offensive guard and right defensive guard. And he also played for the 1916 Cleveland Indians. Tom Gormley. John Haggerty was a right defensive guard. He was 205 pounds. He went to college at Tufts. 25 years old, played in 4 games, started all 4. He was born in 1895 and died in 1974 at age 79. He was in the U.S. Navy, played pro football from 1919 to 1921 with the Cleveland Tigers, Canton Bulldogs, and New York Giants. John Haggerty. Charlie Hastings, they called him Andy. He was a left offensive halfback and left defensive halfback, fullback and linebacker. 5'8", 178 pounds, 27 years old. He went to college at Pittsburgh. Played in 3 games, started 2. He was born in 1893 in Brookville, Pennsylvania, and died in 1931 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at age 41. Went to high school in Brookville, Pennsylvania, and the Kiski School in Salzburg, Pennsylvania. Played pro football just in 1920 with the Cleveland Tigers. Charlie Andy Hastings. Pat Herron was a right offensive end and right defensive end. He was 5'7", 170 pounds. 26 years old, went to college at Pittsburgh, played in 1 game which he did not start. He was born in 1894 in New Kensington, Pennsylvania, and died in 1967 in Monongahela, Pennsylvania at age 71. Went to high school in Monessen, Pennsylvania. Played pro football in 1919 for the Massillon Tigers, 1920 for the Cleveland Tigers. He won 2 college titles for the undefeated University of Pittsburgh Panthers in 1915 and 1916, coached by Pop Warner. He was an All-American in 1916. He was assistant coach for Pittsburgh in 1917, head football coach at Indiana University in Bloomington in 1922, head football coach at Duke University in 1925, and in Washington and Lee University, 1926 to 1928. The First World War, he was in the aviation service. Pat Herron. George Kerr was a left offensive tackle and left defensive tackle, and he played for the Cleveland Tigers in 1919 and 1920. George Kerr. Phil Marshall was a right offensive end and right defensive end. He was 5'8", 165 pounds, 25 years old, went to college at Carnegie Mellon. He played in 1 game, which he started. He was born in 1895 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and died in 1962 in Kittanning, Pennsylvania at age 67. He played pro football just in 1920 for the Cleveland Tigers. Phil Marshall. Joe Mattern was a right offensive halfback and right defensive halfback, and he played for the Cleveland Tigers in 1919 and 1920. Joe Mattern. Jack O'Hearn was a right offensive tackle and right defensive tackle, right offensive guard and right defensive guard. He was 5'10", 183 pounds, 27 years old, went to college at Cornell, played in 4 games, started 1. He was born in 1893 in Brookline, Massachusetts, and died in 1977 in Boston, Massachusetts at age 83. He played pro football just in 1920 for the Cleveland Tigers and the Buffalo All-Americans in 1921. He went to college at Sphinx Head Society. He's in the College Football Fame, inducted in 1972. His brother Ed O'Hearn played for the New York Brickley Giants in 1921. Jack O'Hearn. Red Perlman was a right offensive tackle and left offensive guard, and he played for the Cleveland Tigers from 1919 to 1921. Red Perlman. Leo Petrie was a right offensive halfback and right defensive halfback, fullback and linebacker. He was 200 pounds, 27 years old, went to college at Truman State, played in 2 games, started 1. He was born in 1893 in Stanberry, Missouri, and died in 1970 in Toledo, Ohio at age 77. And his pro football career was just in 1920 for the Cleveland Tigers. Leo Petrie. Al Pierotti was a right offensive halfback and right defensive halfback, fullback and linebacker. Played in 4 games, started 3. And Pierotti played for the Cleveland Tigers in 1919 and 1920. Al Pierotti. Frank Ridzuski was a center and tackle. He was 6'1", 220 pounds, age 28, went to college at Notre Dame. Played in 3 games, started all 3. He was born in 1892 in Chicago, Illinois, and died in 1979 in Chicago at age 87. He played pro football from 1970 to 1926 for the Fort Wayne Friars, Hammond All-Stars, Massillon Tigers, Cleveland Tigers, Chicago Tigers, Hammond Pros, Chicago Cardinals, Chicago Bears, and Milwaukee Badgers. He was a college All-American in 1917 He was in the U.S. Army in the First World War. Frank Rydzuski. Herb Sias was a right offensive tackle and right defensive tackle, 6'1", 203 pounds, 27 years old, went to college at Pittsburgh. Played in one game, which he started. He was born in 1893 in Ames, Iowa, and died in 1954 in Chicago, Illinois at age 61. Played pro football from 1917 to 1924 for the Massillon Tigers, Cleveland Tigers, Dayton Triangles, Rock Island Independents. He was college All-American in 1917. 1923, he was the head coach for the Rock Island Independents. And had a record of 8-2-3 and kicked 3 field goals and 8 extra points in his career. Herb Sias. Joe Spagna, they called him Butch. He was a left offensive tackle and left defensive tackle. 6 foot flat, 215 pounds, 23 years old. Went to college at Brown and Lehigh. Played in 3 games, started all 3. Went to high school in Avon, Massachusetts. Played pro football from 1920 to 1926 with the Cleveland Tigers, Buffalo All-Americans, Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, and Philadelphia Quakers. He was born in 1897 in New York, New York, and died in 1948 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at age 51. In college, he also played pro under an assumed name, Joey Riba or Heap Big Indian. Joe Spagna. Ed Stahl was a right offensive guard and right defensive guard. He played for the Cleveland Tigers from 1919 to 1921. In 1920, he played in 2 games, which he did not start. Ed Stahl. Claude Thornhill was a left offensive tackle and left defensive tackle, right offensive guard and right defensive guard, right offensive tackle and right defensive tackle. 5'11", 185 pounds, 27 years old. He went to college at Pittsburgh. He played in 7 games and started all 7. Thornhill was born in 1893 in New Cumberland, West Virginia, and died in 1956 in Berkeley, California at age 63. He played pro football from 1917 to 1920 for the Massillon Tigers, Cleveland Tigers, Buffalo All-Americans, and he was All-American in college. He was a Stanford head football coach from 1933 to 39. He was a college coach at the University of Pittsburgh under Glenn Pop Warner. His teammates included Knute Rockne. They called him Tiny. Claude Thornhill. Ray Trowbridge was a right offensive end and a right defensive end, left offensive end and left defensive end. He played in 2 games, which he did not start, and he played for the Cleveland Tigers from 1919 to 1920. Ray Trowbridge. Al Westbecker was a center and middle guard, 5'10", aged 19. He played college at Washington and Jefferson, played in 4 games, which he started 2. He was born in 1892 in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, and died in Greensburg in 1966 at age 73. He played pro football from 1916 to 1920 with the Massillon Tigers, Pitcairn Quakers, and Cleveland Tigers. Al Westbecker. Now, as we said, the 1920 Akron Pros were declared NFL champions for that year. Following spring, their star player was Fritz Pollard, running back, who's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Pollard was also a quarterback. The 1920 were the first champions of the NFL in 1920. Well, that concludes today's presentation. Thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.